Greetings viewers, welcome to the English news of the hour coming to you live from Tigrai television. I'm Salome Tigrai and I'll be reading the news for the hour. You may watch the news live on your television screens and on our social media platforms, YouTube and Facebook. I'll now proceed to the details. Opposition party National Congress of Great Tigray, Baitona, issued a statement on Wednesday regarding the detention of an executive member of their party in Addis Ababa, saying his detention should not be seen as an isolated incident, but as part of a persistent campaign of arbitrary detention, torture and abuse against Tigrayans in Ethiopia. The statement reminded that Kibrom had been detained in 2021 following a large crackdown on Tigrayans living outside of Tigray that saw thousands detained and held in internment camps across the country. The statement called on the international community to press the Ethiopian regime to bring to an end an arbitrary detention of Tigrayans and call for the immediate release of all persons held on the basis of their identity or political opinions. Kibrom was detained on Sunday from his home in Addis Ababa and taken to Kaliti Penitentiary. According to family members, Kibrom is yet to be brought before a court of law. Kibrom had recently published a book that discusses the war on Tigray. Our reporter Abel Tsigabu had a short sit-down with the chairperson of the party, Dr. Tsagazab Kahsu, who said that Ethiopia has turned into a big prison for Tigrayans, who, over the past 4 years, have been targeted for detention, torture, and abuse on the basis of their identity. He also called on the international community to push the Ethiopian government for the implementation of international principles of human rights and say no more to the discrimination and abuse of Tigrayans anywhere. Let's take a look.
Has been arrested on Sunday, July 10th, from his house in Addis by Ethiopian security forces. We don't have much information due to the blockade and siege on Tigray due to the communications blackout, but we managed to get a few information that his wife had been arrested prior to his arrest, and he is now in one of the city police stations in custody of the security forces. He had been arrested last year along with the hundreds of thousands of Tigrayans who have been arrested and taken to different concentration camps, and he had suffered a lot of physical and psychological abuse. The regime in Addis, as a campaign, has started a new campaign of arbitrary arrest in the city of Addis Ababa. So he is one of the victims of the new campaign to harass Tigrayans in Ethiopia. The Ethiopian government has waged a genocidal war on Tigrayans. This is a continuation of the genocidal acts of the Ethiopian regime. Ethiopia is not only a big prison for Tigrayans, but it is no more a state or a country for Tigrayans. The Tigrayans don't get any services from Ethiopia as citizens of Ethiopians. They have been harassed, arrested. Hundreds of thousands of Tigrayans are still languishing in concentration camps in different parts of Ethiopia. Former Ethiopian military soldiers who are now still, for over almost 2 years now, who are still languishing in different concentration camps in Ethiopia only because they are Tigrayans, and they are dying in different concentration camps. Over 15,000 of Tigrayans who have been taken to Samara from Afar. Different parts of Afar are still languishing in Samara prison. So practically, Ethiopia has become rather than a state of or a country for Tigrayans, it has become a big prison. The response of the international communities, especially the human rights agencies and the Western countries have been not to the expectation. We did hope that those who value human rights and humanity would stand up for Tigrayans and defend the abuses that are being taken place in broad light. But it appears that the international community is now trading off its value, its own value, universal human rights values for geopolitical reasons. We are calling upon the international community to stand up for their values, for human rights, and they should pressure the genocidal state to stop committing ethnic profiling and human rights abuse on Tigrayans.
Huria Imana is a mother of 4 who moved to Maqala, Tigray's capital, from Humara in western Tigray, just months ahead of the conflict, hoping to open a restaurant here and expand her business. But soon after her arrival, Huria would get into a car accident that would result in her losing her arm. But she still had hope of working and supporting her family until the start of the siege that has blocked her from her savings and forcing her and her children to starve. Argai Gaurimkel has the details.
Huria Iman is a resident of Mekelle and a mother to 3 children. She used to depend on her income from her cafeteria in Humara to support her children. And when she left Western Tigray, she had plans of using her savings to open her own restaurant until an unexpected accident forced her to change her plans.
I used to own a cafeteria in Humara and had a good life. I had plans for opening a restaurant here in Maqala as well, but I lost my left arm in a car accident here in Maqala.
Following the accident, Huria's wounds would take longer than expected to heal, so doctors started to do further testing and realized that she was diabetic.
The hospital realized I was diabetic after some time. They then did another surgery. I'm still under medical follow-up today.
Months of medical checkups would cost tens of thousands of per and depleted Huria's savings. Today she says she has reached a point where she has nothing to feed her children.
I sold my jewelry so I would have something to feed my children. I have nothing to give them now. They're only alive because of the charity of my neighbors. I have family and friends in other parts of the country and abroad, but how could they help me? There is no means of communication and all the banks are closed.
Huria says the war on Tigray started just months into her accident, and today she is not able to find her medication. And when she is able to find it, it is available at an exorbitant price that she cannot afford.
I was under medical follow-up when the siege started, and so I couldn't get my medication. Once I had to stop taking my medication for some 2 months because I couldn't afford the ones in private pharmacies. I became so ill. My entire body was swollen.
Huria says things have become unbearably difficult, so difficult that she sometimes thinks of ending her life.
I become so stressed sometimes, especially when I see my children living in this condition. I even think of committing suicide. I'm only alive now because I'm worried about my children and what they would do without me.
The blockade on the vital services and supplies, including food aid, is devastating millions across the state. Families displaced from their homes, desperate and in dire need of assistance that seems unlikely to arrive.
The ethnic cleansing campaign in western Tigray has meant that over 1 million people have had to leave their homes to seek shelter in IDP camps across the state. The camps, overcrowded and depleted of essential supplies like food and NFIs due to the ongoing siege, are in no condition to care for these IDPs that simply have no place else to go. These camps are, however, more difficult for persons suffering from disabilities, people like Mamit Mulubrhan and her family. Mamit and her family left their homes in western Tigray after Ethiopian forces started to disseminate posters and flyers that called for Tigrayans to leave the area or would otherwise face death. After making the difficult journey to Maqala, Mamit tells our reporter Winta Kidana about life in the IDP camp.
Mamit Mulalem is a mother of 5 who suffers from visual impairment but had to make a tough journey from Bakhar in the district of Kafta Hamara in western Tigray to come to this IDP camp in Maqala. She says her and her family members left their homes after Ethiopian forces that had occupied the area started distributing flyers and posters in the village saying Tigrayans needed to leave.
We left our home on the 9th of February last year. That day, they started to spread flyers in the village, in churches, on road, everywhere. It said, if Tigrayans don't leave the village, we will kill them, as we did in Maikadra. And then they started to kill people. Everyone got scared. Everything was chaotic. That's when we lost touch with my 2 children. We left our home and went to a valley called Idris. After 10 days, we heard that the village was peaceful, so we decided to return. Right after we got home, they came and threatened my husband with a gun. We had no choice but to leave.
Mami says she lost her eyesight some 5 years ago and feels she was a burden to her family while making the long and tough journey from western Tigray.
It's been almost 5 years since I lost my eyesight. Back home, my husband used to take good care of me. I was doing very well until this happened. I had to leave my home. The journey to Maqala was so difficult. I was a burden to my family, and my husband had to put me on a donkey the whole way because I couldn't walk myself.
Mamit arrived to Maqala in September of 2021. Her youngest daughter is the one that cares for her, but tells us that the IDP camp is not suitable to support people like her who suffer from disability.
It's hard to live in this camp with my special needs, but my youngest daughter is helping me cope here.
I help my mom by doing housework. I make her coffee and fetch her water. I never did any housework before because my older sister used to take care of everything. But now, since we've lost touch with her, I have to do everything myself, and it's been difficult.
We were farmers. We had livestock, and we had a good income. We never knew what hunger is until we starved here. There's hunger in this camp. It's hard, especially as a mother, because whenever my kids ask for bread or some food, it breaks my heart not to be able to give it to them.
Mami says the cold temperature in the IDP camp in Maqala is unbearable. She asks that the world should help her family and others like her who are in desperate need of food, blankets, and medication.
The tent overflows with water when it starts to rain. Since winter arrived, we are always cold, especially during the night. We need food and wood to make fire or blankets to help us pass the night. The world has to pressure the Ethiopian government to end the siege. I wish I could speak to my children or access my bank account.
Even now, almost 4 months into the humanitarian truce, IDPs are yet to receive the assistance that they so badly need. IDPs displaced from their homes in a systematic and deliberate campaign of ethnic cleansing.
The horrific violence committed against Tigrayans by Ethiopian forces and their allies from Eritrea has left thousands dead, millions displaced, and many more suffering from heavy injuries. Our reporters traveled to Adi Argudi in central Tigray and spoke with a family that lost their home and their loved ones when Eritrean forces invaded their village in November of 2020. Sarun Zagai reports.
fear wherever they went. On November 23 of 2020, the Eritreans started to attack civilians in Ad-Dargudi, forcing residents to leave their homes to hide in the wilderness. Her only living son, Mas'ud, grabbed her from her home, took her to a hiding place, and left to collect his cattle. This would be the last time Ta'ba would see her son.
He was the only one left of my 5 children, and the Eritrean troops took him from me. Prior to his death, he was trying to hide me away so Eritrean soldiers wouldn't find me and kill me. He took me to the wilderness. He told me to stay put until he collects his cattle. He covered me with a blanket and left. I told him not to go, but he told me he would be back. I wish they would have killed me instead.
Ta'ba waited for days for her son to come back and take her home. 10 days later, family members would find her, take her home, and tell her what had happened to her son.
I waited for a whole day there, but he didn't come back. At dusk, I went out of my hideout and started asking people who were passing by if they saw my son. They all told me they didn't see him. I spent the night there. In the morning, I asked a man if he knew where my son was. He told me he might have gone to another area. I told myself that he wouldn't leave without me and kept asking. They all kept telling me they didn't see him. I waited for 10 days there. He never made it back. My daughter-in-law and the neighbors found me and took me home. They told me that my son had been killed.
Amina Adam, Ta'ba's daughter-in-law, says her and her husband were separated while trying to escape Eritrean soldiers. Amina searched for her husband for 9 days before she finally found his dead body besides that of slaughtered animals. He was a farmer. He was with his cattle when they killed him. They first slaughtered 10 goats and an ox, and then they killed him there. Amina was pregnant when she lost her husband and was hiding in the wilderness. When she finally returned home, she realized the soldiers had camped there, taking everything they could find. Amina had come to realization that she had not only lost her husband, but also the home that they had shared together. For 9 days, while we were out in the wilderness, Eritrean troops were camping in our house. They used up everything while they were there and stole whatever was left when they left. I was pregnant at the time. I came back to an empty house and had nothing to feed my children. Mas'ud was not the only loved one Amina lost. Her father would be taken at the hands of Ethiopian forces in January of 2021. First, they killed my husband, and then they killed my father. My father was killed by Ethiopian soldiers. He was 88 years old, and he was too old to leave the house. That's where they killed him. We were forbidden from burying his body, so we buried him at night, when the soldiers wouldn't see us. Amina, a single mother of 8, is now forced to take care of her children and her mother-in-law, alone with no salary or help in sight.
Women and girls in Tigray were subjected to extreme forms of sexual violence, including gang rape, sexual slavery, and violence leading to multiple health complications, including fistula. We visited Maqala Hamlin Fistula Center and spoke with multiple women, including one survivor of sexual violence who, even a year after her attack, has now been able to heal from the physical wounds of her attack. Let's take a look. For much of the world, obstetric fistula is an academic rarity. And 2 years ago, before the start of the war on Tigray, it was on its way to being eradicated in Tigray as well. But 2 years later, following the systematic destruction of health facilities across the region, the Fistula Center has once again become overwhelmed by women suffering from the condition. Another factor in exacerbating the number of fistula cases in Tigray has been the widespread use of sexual violence.
I begged them to leave me be, and they responded by saying, "Shut up, you agama." They raped me after I had just given birth. It was 2 Eritrean soldiers. They took turns raping me. 3 days later, I realized I couldn't control my urine. I only had 1 child, and they killed him.
Another patient we met at the center says that because medical facilities in her village were destroyed, she had to give birth in her house. Her labor lasted 5 whole days, after which she was no longer able to control her urine.
I was home during labor. It lasted for 5 days. I couldn't go to a hospital. I gave birth at home. I couldn't control my legs. They would just lean to one side. I couldn't control my bowel movement after that.
Even after a year of the traumatic incident that left these women incontinent, both are yet to heal, as medical treatment remains out of reach.
I'm in a terrible situation. I can't control my urine. I feel a horrible pain in my uterus as well.
Medical Director of Hamlin Fistula Center, Dr. Malak Abraha, and coordinating nurse Azib Kalayu on their part say that the center is on the verge of collapsing due to the blockade on all essential items, including medical supplies.
ናይ ምግቢ ናይ ጽሬት ናይ ሕክምና መሳርሒ መመርመሪታቱን በተዘለው ከባን አጽዋን
We haven't been able to provide food or food sanitation materials as well as items necessary for diagnostic because of the siege. We are on the verge of closing our doors.
ሓደ ዓመት ሙሉ ምንም ነገር የቡሊ ካብና ሰራሕተኛ ደሞዝ ጀሚሩ ማለት እዩ ለተን ህሙማት ለብጀተለን በጀት ምንም ነገር የለ
The center hasn't had anything for a year now. Since last June, we haven't had salary for staff or a budget for the patients. We're reaching a point where we can no longer provide care for those desperate women.
This facility, the only one treating women with fistula cases in Tigray, just like all of Tigray's health system, has been exhausted by the ongoing siege, prolonging the suffering of these women and their families. That's all for today. Thank you for tuning in. Bye for now.